Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. We're speaking from Sriram Mayapur with our little pod here. It's a small group of devotees holding up for the coronavirus. We've been reading from Srimad Bhagavatam every day because if you don't do any other sadhana, every day you should hear Srimad Bhagavatam. Chanting Hare Krishna is in a different category. Guru Maharaj said, better you die than not chant your rounds. So we've been reading from the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 25, the glories of devotional service. And we're on text number 23. These are the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev. So it's 3, 25, 23. If you want to recite with us, it's very auspicious. Lord Kapila Dev tells his mother, Madashraya kata mishtaha shanvanti kantayanti cha tapanti vividastapa naitan madgata chetasa. Engage constantly in chanting and hearing about me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The sadhus do not suffer from material miseries because they're always filled with thoughts of my pastimes and activities. Reading from Srila Prabhupada's purport, he says, there are multifarious miseries in material existence, those pertaining to the body and mind, those imposed by other living entities, and those imposed by natural disturbances. But a sadhu is not disturbed by such miserable conditions because his mind is always filled with Krishna consciousness. And thus he does not like to talk about anything, the activities of the Lord. Maharaj Ambarish did not speak of anything but the pastimes of the Lord. Vacham Sivai Kunta Gunanavarnane. Bhagavatam 9, 4, 18. He engaged his words only in glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sadhus are always interested in hearing about the activities of the Lord or his devotees. Since they are filled with Krishna consciousness, they are forgetful of the material miseries. Ordinary conditioned souls, being forgetful of the activities of the Lord, are always full of anxieties and material tribulations. On the other hand, since the devotees always engage in the topics of the Lord, they are forgetful of the miseries of material existence. Beautiful purport from Srila Prabhupada. Yeah. So this morning we gave a title to our talk, which is there are no problems, really. There really are no problems. Srila Prabhupada describes here that devotees, because they're Krishna conscious, they're forgetful of material miseries, but conditioned souls, being forgetful of the Lord, are always full of anxiety. So we'd like to discuss something about this today. First, we'll offer a little prayer. Gora Graganya Gana Gota Goloruharam Gauranga Gudatama Gopyada Kopa Vriksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Sinha Gora Govinda Deshi Kavaram Satatam Namami Vancha Kopa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this is a very emphatic statement of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Kapila Dev, to his mother, that those persons who are Madashraya, who are taking shelter of Krishna by Katam Rishta Shanvanti, hearing the wonderful stories in Katha of Krishna, and katayanti, chanting those stories, then tapanti vivida tapa, different types of tapa or suffering, madgata cetasa, they don't experience it, naitan madgata cetasa. This is the solution of the Hare Krishna movement. We should ask a very maybe unpalatable question. Have we really joined this movement? Do we really believe in this movement? Are we taking shelter of this movement to solve the problems? In Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Rupa Goswami, in the first wave, first chapter, he gives different characteristics of bhakti, 6 characteristics which correspond to sadhana bhakti, to bhav bhakti, and to prema bhakti. And the very first is kleshagni. Kleshagni means it destroys all types of suffering. So we should ask ourselves this question. If we have this suffering, then have we really joined the movement? Have we really taken shelter of the solution given in this movement? Or do we have other solutions for our problems? Srila Prabhupada once arrived at a GBC meeting here in Mayapur, and he walked into the room and he told the devotees, everyone got quiet when Prabhupada came in, and Prabhupada spoke the following very profound words to them. He said, this chanting should go on. Instead of meetings, resolutions, dissolutions, revolutions, and no solutions, there should be chanting. As Naranjan Maharaj sometimes says, he says, if you're looking for some other solution for me, I'm sorry. This is the only solution I have. This is the solution of the Krishna consciousness movement. If we're trying to take shelter of some other solution, maybe we think, according to the modes of nature, some people will think that money will solve the problems. Some people will think that management will solve the problems. We should all just start management schools everywhere, and then we'll all become perfect, and the whole movement will work very good because we're expert in management. Or if we just collect lots and lots of money, then that'll solve all the problems. Or other people, maybe a little more in the mode of goodness, say, no, we need education. Everybody should study the books and memorize so many things from the books, and that'll solve all the problems. But Srila Prabhupada said, this chanting should go on. Instead of meetings, resolutions, dissolutions, revolutions, and no solutions, there should be chanting. This is a solution of the Krishna consciousness movement. If we're still suffering, if we still have some problems in our life, then what does it mean? Are we really taking shelter of this movement? Have we really joined this movement? Once a godbrother of mine was speaking with my Guru Maharaj, and he asked a very relevant question. He said, Guru Maharaj, why are there so many conflicting ideas for the ISKCON movement? Why are there so many problems? And Gaura Govinda Maharaj became angry. He said, Bah, stop it. He said, there's no conflict, no conflict, no conflict. You are a mad fellow. There's no conflict, no confusion. It's all clear, Baba. Conflict and confusion are within you. Therefore, you see conflict. If you put on yellow glasses, everything looks yellow. A man sees a reflection of his mind. In your mind, there's conflict and confusion, and therefore you see it outside. When Hanuman went to Ravan's capital, Lanka, he was extremely angry because the demon Ravan had kidnapped his master's wife, Sita, out of anger. Hanuman's eyes were red hot. Ravan had kept Sita in a very lovely garden called the Ashok Van. Ashok means no lamentation. That garden was extremely beautiful. Ravan had brought so many varieties of nice flowers, fruits, and birds from the heavenly planets. He had a very good landscape architect. Guru Maharaj says. In that garden were many wonderful ponds and springs. Hanuman went there, but Hanuman saw no variety. He saw everything red because anger was inside him. His eyes were red hot. Do you understand? Are your doubts clear? The devotee said, no. And Gaura Govinda Maharaj said, no, why not? The devotee said, well, for instance, when Prabhupada was directly present, everything in ISKCON was under his direction. Gaura Govinda Maharaj replied, he's still directing, but you can't see it. You have no vision. It will take time for you to understand. Be patient and wait, wait, wait. All these problems are inside you. The conflict is within you. Therefore, you see such things outside. There is no problem. There is no problem. There is no problem. If we take shelter of hearing and chanting as the solution, as the only solution for this movement, then there's no problem. If we think there's some problem, we have a problem, because there's no problem in the Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore, this chanting should go on instead of meetings, resolutions, dissolutions, revolutions, and no solutions. There should be chanting. To hell with your so-called solutions of economic development. To hell with your so-called solutions of Varnashram Dharma. To hell with your so-called solutions of management. There's only one solution, and that's what Srila Prabhupada came to give us. And so for a devotee, there's no problem. Kunti Devi, she prays, I have no problem. She says, actually, sometimes it looks like there's a problem. She says, Vipadashantu tasasvat tatra tatra jagadguru bhavato darshanam yatsyada punar bhavadarshanam. She said, sometimes it looks like there's problems in my life. This rascal Duryodhana, he tried to poison my little boy, Bhim, when he was just a small child. They offered him a cake with poison in it. And then he threw his body, his unconscious body, into a lake full of terribly poisonous snakes. What was the problem? And then they cheated us in a gambling match, and they sent us away to the forest. That was a problem. And then Duryodhana, he tried to burn us all to death in a house of lac. That was a problem. She said, but Vipada means problem. Vipada santu tasasva, let it happen again and again. These problems are very good. My grandmother once quoted this verse, and he said, you can't pray like this. She says, Bhavato darshanam yat sharapuna bhava darshanam, because when these problems come, then we call out to you. And then there's no problem. Apuna bhava darshanam. We don't see any problem in the world. There is no problem. Really. There really is no problem. The problem is only in our mind. But if we're drinking the nectar of Krishna consciousness, Rama Nama Ladua, Krishna Nama Gi, Hari Nama Kanda Kira Gori Gori Pi. It's a nice Odia poem which describes that the name of Lord Ram is just like a nice Ladu. The name of Krishna is like nice clarified butter, ghee. And the name of Hari is like a Kanda Kira, sweet rice. So you take the Rama Nama Ladua, you add the Krishna Nama ghee, and then the Hari Nama Kanda Kira, and Gori, you mix it up and pee. You drink it. And you become completely intoxicated. Prabhupada writes in the purport, 2nd Canto, Chapter 3, Text 10. He says, Srila Jiva Goswami has explained this desirelessness as Bhajaniya Parama Purusha, Sukhamata Sasukatvam in his Sandarbha. This means that one should feel happy only by experiencing the happiness of the Supreme Lord. So when the devotees are hearing and chanting, they're so intoxicated, they're so happy, there is no problem, really. There really is no problem, even in the society of devotees. In the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, we were reading a nice verse last night. Narada Muni speaks to Prahlad Maharaj in the 1st Canto, Chapter 4, Text 6, and tells him, Krishna Vishto Yo Shmitameva Matto Nityangayam Kampamano Rudamschar Lokan Sarvan Udadan Samsritibhyo Vishnur Bhaktin Harshayam Asatanvam. While immersed in meditation on Krishna, he said, you are so Krishna Vishta, so absorbed in Krishna, that Asmita, Atma, you forgot all about yourself because you were Mata. You would become mad thinking of Krishna. And what were you doing? Nrityangayan kampamanurgamscha. You were dancing and singing and shaking and calling out very loudly. And that behavior is lokan sarvan udaran. It delivered the whole universe. Vishnu Bhaktam Harshayam Asatanvan. And it filled everyone with great joy. So we need to come together. We need community. Community is something which brings about unity. It's common unity. We need unity, not uniformity. It said that strength lies in differences, not in similarities. Urmila Mataji, she did some research for her PhD degree. What were the factors that influenced children in the Hare Krishna movement to seriously dedicate themselves to the practice of bhakti? And the first thing she found out was none of them were inspired to be a devotee because of the management. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend anybody. It wasn't they were in love with the GBC meetings and they said, damn, these guys are such great managers. They didn't care about the institution. She found 4 general principles that inspired those kids to become devotees. The first was love and trust relationships. The second was stories. She told one example that there was a family who were living in Las Vegas, and they were been initiated devotees, but after some time they stopped following any principles. I mean, 0 principles. Well, she was saying they weren't even vegetarian. Gambling, living in Las Vegas, taking intoxicants, but they had one thing they were doing with their children every day. They were reading Krishna book with them. That's the only thing they were doing. And those 2 children both became really nice devotees because they loved the stories. Stories are so important. Meaningful service. When we engage those children, we give them some respect and don't just treat them like a kid, but we give them some responsibility. And positive emotional experiences, that was the 4th common factor she found. Positive emotional experiences, meaning that when they go to the temple, people love them. Not that they go to the temple and they say, what do you dress like that for? You're supposed to wear a choli, not a t-shirt, and you have no sleeves on, or you don't have your head covered, or this or that. And the children, then they become disturbed and they decide, I don't want to go anymore. Doesn't mean there shouldn't be a dress code, but there's a certain way to institute things. There's a certain way to institute culture. And those children, if they have a bad experience going to the temple, then they identify the temple with a bad experience. Temple may have nothing to do with it, really, but they identify it with that. And so then they don't want to go anymore. So we need community, but this common unity is based on Krishna consciousness. There's a beautiful description in Gopal Champu, chapter 3. Jiva Goswami says that when all the ladies of Braj saw that Mother Yashoda didn't have a child, they all took off their ornaments. And they didn't put them on again until Krishna was born. That's community. They had so much love for Mother Yashoda that they showed some solidarity. But that solidarity is based on Krishna consciousness. It's not based on anything else. Srila Prabhupada, in Nectar of Instruction, in his purport to text 4, he says, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness has been established to facilitate these 6 kinds of loving exchanges between devotees. This is ISKCON. This is what has been established to facilitate. He says the life of the Krishna Conscious Society is nourished by these 6 types of loving exchange among the members. Therefore, people must be given the chance to associate with the devotees of ISKCON, because simply by reciprocating in the 6 ways mentioned above, an ordinary man can fully revive his dormant Krishna consciousness. But the question comes, who's really a member of the society? Many times we remember our Guru Maharaj's words. What is ISKCON, he would say? ISKCON is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And then he would say, who's really a member? Say, that person is really Krishna conscious. And as we often comment, I remember very well, sitting in front of about 100 devotees, and when he's giving class, he said that, then he suddenly pointed at me, and he said, Madhavananda, not yet joined. So when devotees ask me, when did you join ISKCON? I say, well, I'd like to, but I haven't yet. So have we really joined the Society of Krishna Consciousness? If all that we see is problems in the society, we're not seeing the Society of Krishna Consciousness. And maybe we're not even really a member. Right? There's a beautiful statement by a mundane philosopher, Aldous Huxley, which is very Krishna conscious. He described in one of his books, he said, the effects that follow the constant and intense concentration upon evil are always disastrous. Those who crusade not for God and themselves, but against the demons and others, never succeed in making the world better. No man can concentrate his attention on evil or even the idea of evil and remain unaffected. To be more against the demon than for godliness is exceedingly dangerous. Every crusader is apt to go mad. He's haunted by the wickedness that he attributes to his enemies. It becomes sort of a part of him. Therefore, the Srimad Bhagavatam describes 11th canto, chapter 28, text 2, Parasvabhava karmani ya prasamsati nindati sa asya brashyate swartad asyat jabidiveshata. That whoever indulges in praising other people in a cheap way or criticizing other people, they're going to become deviated very quickly by being engaged in illusory activities. We become affected by it. If we want to appoint ourselves as a reformer, we often read the statement from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, an article he wrote in 1932 in an article in The Harmonist. He said, the world stands in no need of any reformer. The world has a very competent person for guiding its minutest happenings. The person who thinks there's need for reform, he needs reform. No person can change the world even by one hair chopped out by providence. Are we a member of the Krishna consciousness movement? Do we see this, or do we see a need for reform? Babu, we have to have a debate. I have to expose all the rascals. Well, you're a rascal because you're not taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada's solution. And that means you're part of the problem. Directly or indirectly, you're part of the problem, because when we promote reform by any other solution other than the holy name and Krishna Katha, we're giving a message to the devotees. Chanting Hare Krishna is okay, but it doesn't really work. And if you really want to solve the problems, then you got to go out and find everybody's faults and tell everybody about it, and that's going to solve the problems. I rejected that before I came to this movement. I went on July 4th in 1979, I think it was. We went to Washington, D.C., and I protested with a group of people there. We got tear gassed by the government, beaten with sticks. I've been part of movements like that, and I haven't ever seen it work, ultimately, because it doesn't change people's hearts. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he goes on to say, what is necessary is to change our outlook on this world. He says the scriptures declare that all that's necessary, the only thing that's necessary, is to listen with an open mind to the name of Krishna from the lips of a bona fide devotee. As soon as the name Krishna enters the listening ear, he clears up the vision of the listener, so he no longer has any ambition of acting the part of a reformer of any other person, because he finds nobody's left without the highest guidance. It is therefore his own reform that he's increasingly able to realize by the eternally continuing mercy of the Supreme Lord. This is a solution of the Krishna consciousness movement. Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter to New Haridas on 22nd of November 1974. He said, although there may be some difficulties within our society, these things are not very important. although there may be some difficulties within our society, these things are not very important. What is important is that we should simply fix our mind on Krishna's lotus feet. This is his instruction in the Bhagavad Gita. We associate with one another so that we can assist each other in hearing and chanting about Krishna. That is the purpose of our society. This you won't find in the materialistic society, where all hearing and chanting is simply concerned with sense gratification. Srila Prabhupada, again, in a letter to Tamal Krishna Maharaj, on the 19th of August, 1968, he said, "Your appreciation for the service of your God brothers is very much laudable. It's good. This is actually a devotee's business, that everyone should appreciate the value of other devotees. Nobody should criticize anyone, because everyone is engaged in the service of the Lord according to one's capacity. And the thing is, Krishna wants to see how much one is sincere in rendering him service." The Prophet's saying, this is a devotee's business. We shouldn't criticize anyone else because everyone is engaged in service. This should be our realization. We've been watching every day, part of our great happiness is Prabhupada Remembrances on YouTube. And a few days ago, we were watching one from Mahatma Prabhu, which struck me so much I wanted to repeat what he said. Mahatma Prabhu was living in Vancouver at that time, and he mentioned how in the summer of 1971, all the devotees from Vancouver, they came down for the Rath Yatra in San Francisco. And he was a temple president at that time in Vancouver. And when he arrived, he heard that there was going to be a temple president's meeting with Srila Prabhupada. And Mahatma thought, wow, this is going to be good. I want to see what's going to happen. Because up to that time, he said, he'd only ever seen Prabhupada giving class. He'd never been with Prabhupada in an intimate setting on a morning walk. So that day of the Rath Yatra, the whole day he was thinking, what is the temple president's meeting going to be like? Is it going to be some kind of like corporate managerial meeting where there's policies and strategies set? And he was thinking Prabhupada was going to tell us how to take care of the books and organize and things like that. And so then the time for the meeting came. And Mahatma recalls that they all came into Prabhupada's room one by one. Everybody offered obeisances. And then Prabhupada gave everyone some dry fruit and nut prasadam from his plate. And then he sat everyone down. And then Prabhupada began to preach to the devotees, to them, the managers there, about preaching and opening more centers. Prabhupada told him, I want at least 108 centers. And Prabhupada was encouraging him to preach. And that was, the meeting was all about open more centers, preach, spread Krishna consciousness. He said, I always was interested to see how Prabhupada managed, because there's different management styles. I wondered how Prabhupada managed the movement, because generally managers of an international society have many secretaries, telephones, desks, offices, and so on. But every time I was with Srila Prabhupada, no management went on. He preached. There was never a time I was with him when he was rushing as we do with this emergency and that emergency. Prabhu, it's an emergency. We can't go to the morning program today. Prabhupada, he said, had a totally different way of dealing with things. He didn't use the phone, but he wrote letters. Prabhupada's managing an international society saying, how is it possible he's not using the phone? He's not talking about problems. He's not talking about management. So many statements are there from Srila Prabhupada in this way. Another letter to Prabhupada wrote to Bablu, who's now Ashram Maharaj, wonderful devotee. 9th December 1973, Srila Prabhupada said, now we have, by Krishna's grace, built up something significant in the shape of this ISKCON, and we are all one family. Sometimes there may be disagreement and quarrel, but we should not go away. These inebrities can be adjusted by the cooperative spirit, tolerance, and maturity. These three things: cooperative spirit, tolerance, and maturity. So I request you to kindly remain in the association of our devotees and work together The test of our actual dedication and sincerity to serve the spiritual master will be in this mutual cooperative spirit to push on this movement and not make factions and deviate. Prabhupada wrote a letter, 14th of October, 1971, to Brinda. He said, I have noted your several complaints against the devotees, but it would be better to set the example rather than to criticize the defects of the devotees. We should always remember that we recruit members from people in general. It's not expected that every one of our members should be immediately to the standard qualification. The best thing for you is to set the example by your personal behavior and try to reform the others, not by criticizing, but by friendly behavior. If sometimes there are any disagreements, we should try to forget such incidences and be always in friendship with each other. So I hope you'll immediately return to your husband and forget all these disagreements and fully cooperate for developing our Berlin Center. This is the nature of a devotee, someone who's really joined this movement. They see this is Srila Prabhupada's solution, and there's no other solution. It's not that criticism is going to solve the problem. It's been tried. It's been tried over and over and over again. It should be there. Srila Prabhupada sometimes criticized like anything, and he said we shouldn't compromise. Devotees may protest at this point and say that, but that's Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada also said, you can't imitate me. My Guru Maharaj said, Guru can point out someone's faults. Guru can chastise someone. If you're not Guru, don't try to imitate Guru. Ashwadadani vimuke prashinvati yaschopadesha sivanama paradha. The Padma Purana emphatically states it's nama parad, an offense to the holy name, to preach to someone who doesn't have faith in you. Don't see them, don't think that you can judge people. We don't know. There's a wonderful story in this regard. In Rajasthan, there was one king who was a great devotee of the Lord. And he would only give money, because that's the duty of a king. He's supposed to encourage people, give money and encouragement. He never gave any money to ordinary singers or dancers or comedians, because he was fully convinced everything belongs to Krishna. And so he decided in his mind, I won't give any money to anyone who's averse to Krishna. And so there were a group of dacoits who decided to rob the king. And so they dressed themselves up like Vaishnavas. Put a kunti mala, tilak, and they came before him and they were chanting japa, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And the king was very, very respectful. He fell down to worship him. And then they began to sing and dance and do kirtan in front of the deity. And the king, he had so much faith in the dress of a Vaishnava. He saw them, he thought, wow, they're really absorbed in ecstatic love. And he said, you're so glorious, you favored me today. And then he fed them very opulent, nice prasadam. And then the king brought a plate of gold coins. And he put it before them. And he told them, please, I know you're Vaishnavas and you don't like to take money, but take this as prasad. When those dacoits who wanted to hurt the king, who wanted to cheat him, they saw his faith in Vaishnava dress and his devotion to Krishna, it changed their hearts. There was no criticism going on. There was no big reform. There was no movement or anything. Just they saw his behavior that changed their hearts. And then they became devoted to the Lord. And then they told him, the king, actually, there's a bad smell coming from this money. We don't want it. Now we know, prema dana vina vyarta dadata jiva, that real wealth is love of God. And so then they got up and started leaving. And the king, he grabbed their hands and said, no, don't go. Why are you leaving? And they said, no. Now, because of our contact with you, our consciousness has become purified. You please allow us to go. Now we're going to go somewhere and we're going to worship the Lord. So this reform comes about when we reform ourselves. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada said, this chanting should go on. Instead of meetings, resolutions, dissolutions, revolutions, and no solutions, there should be chanting. This is a solution of the Krishna consciousness movement. Once I was invited to take prasadam, the very senior Vaishnava, disciple Srila Prabhupada, who was a sannyasi guru, he'd left ISKCON some years before, and he had his own temple, and he invited me one day to come and take prasadam with him. And he's my well-wisher, my Guru Jana, so I respectfully went there, and we were taking prasadam, just the two of us, and it turned out his purpose seemed to be to have me there was to preach to me that ISKCON was bad and that I should join his branch of things. And I felt a little hurt by that because I want to be dedicated to Srila Prabhupada's mission. But this particular person, you'd have to know him. Nobody can defeat him in debate. He was a very, very expert speaker. And he's also very senior to me. And he's speaking in a way, really, which was indicative of his affection to me. And moreover, the other problem was the things he was saying, the bad things he was saying about ISKCON, they were true. That was a big problem. I couldn't exactly argue with it. So I was quiet for like an hour. And he was going on and this bad thing and that bad thing and so many things. And finally, because I was so quiet, he said, so what do you think? And I said, well, Maharaj, it's like Kurukshetra. And he said, Kurukshetra, what do you mean Kurukshetra? And I said, well, at the end of his life, Thakur Bhaktivinoda, he wanted to go to Kurukshetra. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta commented that some people were confused by that. And they said, what do you want to go to Kurukshetra? There's lakes of blood there. And that's a place of battle. That's where Parshuram killed the Kshatriyas. That's the place of the battle of Kurukshetra. We don't want to go to Kurukshetra. We want to go to Radhakund. We want to go to Vamsivat. What do you want to go to Kurukshetra for? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati commented, they're Vairasik. I was telling this to this sannyasi. They're not Rasik persons because they don't understand that service, which is the most needed, is the most appreciated. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur understood that at Kurukshetra, Radharani was there and her need was the greatest. Because at Kurukshetra, there's no Vamsivat, there's no Radhakund, there's no Govardhan Hill, there's no Vrindavan Forest, no Jamuna River. Radharani needs help. And that service, which is the most needed, is the most appreciated. And so I turned to this respected senior person. I said, Maharaj, this is why I stay in ISKCON. Because I see problems. And I am firmly convinced that Srila Prabhupada will be pleased with me if I stay and I try to solve the problems. I'm not a fool. I see the problems. It's very unpalatable sometimes. It's very, very disturbing. But I only see one solution, chanting. And if we do this chanting, there's no problem, really. So we'll stop there. We've gone a little over time. Please forgive me for ranting and raving today. This is something a little close to my heart. If any devotees have any reflections or comments, Alex Fallu has given a very nice comment. How do we join the Krishna Consciousness Society? This is my desire, Prabhu. I also want to join. So to join, we have to be Krishna conscious. How do we do that? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Parisevanam, Archanam, Nandanam, Dashyam, Sakyam, Abhinavedam. We have to practice the Navavidi Bhakti, the ninefold processes of Bhakti, beginning with hearing and chanting. And the more that we absorb ourselves in that, the more we'll actually be able to join this movement. And joining the movement, then we can really help Srila Prabhupada. And we can really change things. When we see the problems in the movement, there's no problem. Govinda Maharaj is saying very, very clearly, my Guru Maharaj is saying, there is no problem. You see the problem. The problem's with you. Let's be part of the solution. And there's only one solution. Srila Prabhupada came to give Krishna consciousness as a solution for all problems. If we see some other kind of solution, then what message are we giving to the devotees? What message are we giving to the non-devotees? We're telling them indirectly, well, Krishna consciousness doesn't really work. It's a good place to get some nice food. Some pretty girls are here, some nice guys to marry. You can have some fun, but it's not going to solve your problems. That's the message we've been given. Nonsense. Krishna consciousness solves all problems. And therefore, Lord Kapila Devi has told his mother, Madashraya kata mishtaha chinvanti katayanti chatapanti vividastha pa naitan margata chetasa. The persons who are constantly engaged in hearing and chanting about me, they have no material miseries because they're absorbed in Krishna consciousness. That's our solution. So I want to stop there. If anybody has any reflections or comments, Marupati Prabhu. Hare Krishna Marupati, so nice to see you. I only see your picture there. He says, Hare Krishna, sometimes a manager is intoxicated with power and forgets about respectful management. He may even become harmful for the movement. How can such a person be rectified if we do not see the faults? Well, we shouldn't be fools. If we see someone promoting something which is not Krishna consciousness, how can I have faith in that? If I see that someone says, well, we have these problems and the solution is management and money, how can I have faith in that? I'm sorry. That's not Srila Prabhupada's solution. Nevertheless, we need to cooperate, as Srila Prabhupada spoke many, many times. And if someone is in a position of manager, just like there was one devotee who was a temple president in a large temple in North America, and he wasn't following the regulated principles. He wasn't chanting 16 rounds a day. That's a scandal. He's a temple president. And the devotees became very disturbed, and they complained to Srila Prabhupada about it. And Prabhupada said, he's a good manager, you leave him there. And Prabhupada left. And after Prabhupada left, they saw this person wasn't following the regulated principles, and he wasn't chanting, he wasn't attending the programs. So the devotees, they kicked him out. And when Srila Prabhupada found out, he was furious. He said, why did you do that? He's a good manager. So we should be tolerant and loving, accepting of each other, and see even sometimes a manager may become intoxicated, like Indra becomes intoxicated, becomes proud, and starts treating people like they're his slaves or something. But we can tolerate that for the Krishna consciousness movement. I often think if people can tolerate me, then I should tolerate others. And I do want people to tolerate me. It's not easy. If you don't believe me, write a letter to Krishna Kundi Devi Dasi. She can tell you it's not easy to tolerate me. It's not easy to tolerate each other, but we want to do that for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada. How can we rectify such a person if we don't see his faults? We may see his faults. We're not blind, we're not stupid, we're not sentimental. But we see the solution as Krishna consciousness. The solution is loving dealings with the devotees, not just by going and beating someone or driving them out, but by touching their heart, by showing love and compassion. And Srila Prabhupada wrote in that letter to Brinda in Berlin, he said, by setting a good example ourselves, just like the king in the story. Such an amazing story. It doesn't say, but it seems likely that he could understand these guys were bogus. They weren't really Vaishnavas. But he was so happy to see them chanting. He was so happy to see them wearing tilak and kunti mala and Vaishnav dress that he respected them as Vaishnavas. And that respect, which came from his heart, changed their hearts. That's real reform. And all this other kind of reform, it just creates a disturbance. It just hurts the hearts of the devotees. It just destroys our movement. I'm sorry. I'm really fanatical about this. I know, but I just don't have any faith in that. Hari Rameshwara says, chanting Hare Krishna will solve your problems. Sounds too simple. Simple for the simple. We should be simple. Srila Prabhupada was very simple. He didn't have big meetings and all these high-tech things. Even though he's managing an international society with 10,000 disciples and writing hundreds of books and traveling all over the world and having hundreds of temples all over the world. Alex writes in, is it also kind of a Putana demon when we become like a guru and we start pointing out someone's mistakes? What a deep comment. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's very reflective. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati says that the Putana represents the false guru. And so if we're representing ourselves as guru, when we're not accepted by anybody. Nobody gives a damn what you think. But I have to go and tell everybody anyway. And I have to write some magazine and tell everybody about all the faults in ISKCON. Yes, then we become like Putana. Putana is someone who's offering her breast to the babies and killing them. It looks like she's nourishing them. So such a person who's taking shelter of argument and exposing the rascals, yes, they're like Putana because they're offering some nourishment with their breast. But that nourishment is actually poison, the poison of criticism. And Ramana Sukaprabhu, my dear God uncle, is listening. Thank you, Ramana Sukaprabhu, for taking part. He says, Srila Prabhupada's system of management was for the GBC to make sure the temple leaders were attending the full morning program, chanting the rounds and following the principles. But what should be done if the GBC is neglectful in doing this simple service? Oh my gosh, and Vaisheshika was here also. My humble photos. I won't repeat what Vaisheshika says right here. I hope I get the blessings of Vaisheshika and Ramana Sukaprabhu and others. Ramana Sukaprabhu, your heart is hurt sometimes. It causes so much pain in the heart of the devotees when we see leaders who drive people away. We see leaders who are not taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada's simple program. And what can we do in that case? Well, it's no longer the 1970s and 1980s. One thing we can do is we can leave. We can go to some other place where we have association with devotees who are like-minded. Before that, we might try to approach that senior devotee in a humble, respectful way, in a loving way, and say, Maharaj, Prabhu, I don't understand. Why are you doing like this? This isn't Srila Prabhupada's program. And see what their response is. If their response is angry and dismissive, and what have you done for Prabhupada? Shut up, and get away from me. Then what can you do? We can try to get all the members of the community together. We can do some politics, but that's just going to create more of a problem. And in some ways, that manager who may be like this temple president I was mentioning, who wasn't following principles, who wasn't attending the morning program, but he was a good manager. He was taking good care of the accounts. Book distribution was going on. The deity worship was going on. The temple was being managed nicely. Prabhupada appreciated that. So we can also see like that. And if it's intolerable for us, then we can exhibit the opulence of a Vaishnava. We can be tolerant, or we can just go somewhere else. Or perhaps we can also approach some other GBC members. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. You can write a letter to Vaisheshika Prabhu. Or talk to him if he has time. Now he's become a very busy person. Thank you, Vaisheshika Prabhu. Thank you, Ramana Sukaprabhu. Anybody else have any comments or reflections? Krishna Kumar, something? You have to shout practically.
You spoke about that quote from Huxley.
Yeah, Aldous Huxley's quote.
And this story about the king who changed the heart of those dacoits by his respect towards Krishna Nam, really, not even them, but towards Krishna Nam. That's what he was giving respect to. And I just wanted to read one sentence from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. No one should decry the habit of honest, inquisitive hearing as if it were less intelligent than presenting challenges.
Wow. Read that again. Come close. Come close. Let me read it. Where's it at? Okay. He says, Narendra Maharaj likes this very much. Krishna Kumar's reading this. No one should decry, no one should criticize the habit of honest, inquisitive hearing as if it were less intelligent than presenting challenges. Wow. Thank you very much. And thank you to all the Vaishnavas, and thank you to Ramana Sukaprabhu and Vaisheshika and all the senior devotees for tolerating so many things, exhibiting to us how to serve Srila Prabhupada in spite of so many difficulties. It means so very much to us. Grantharashna Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki, Vanchakalpatarubhishcha, Kripa Sindhu